Hey guys, this is a video explaining the basic ideas behind the TPR and answering some of the questions that you guys have asked about it and providing additional guidance so that you can complete your project successfully. So let's get started. So the TPR is a short overview of a conservation technology of your choice, and it is presented in some sort of web-based media. It is also meant to be a practice assignment to prepare you for the EcoSpot. The EcoSpot is another assignment that comes later in the course that you're going to be working on in several steps. It is larger than the TPR, and it also uses web-based media for your for presenting information. And the main idea here is that you're becoming familiar with one technology that you might later use for your EcoSpot, or at least you're getting used to what you need to do in order to share information online. It is also an assignment in which the amount of effort you put into it will be considered for your grade. We're not necessarily expecting perfection because you're getting acquainted with these technologies that you haven't used before, and therefore it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you do need to put some effort into it. And it is not meant to be an exhaustive explanation of everything that the technology you selected can do, right? You don't need to be into the minute details of it. It's also not meant to be absolutely perfect since you're learning how to use the technology, but we at least have to see that you have a basic familiarity with it. An important thing to think about when you're putting together your project is to consider your audience. Your audience in this case is not me, it would be your peers and the general public. You're putting this out there in the internet. And so people might find your project and might use it to learn about your particular technology if they're interested. So think about that. And one thing that you might want to do is try to make it so that it would be entertaining for such an audience. Something that if you were in that audience, if you were out there and found this on your project online, you would enjoy watching. So try to make it fun. One important way to do this is avoiding including walls of text. If you're using any kind of presentation-based format, that's the kind of thing that people don't want to see, right? Nobody wants to read all of that. And if you're narrating your presentation or your project, it's a good idea to have sort of a conversational way of speaking about your technology. As far as the length of the project, there is no set length, but my recommendation is that you try to avoid going over 10 minutes. And this is not a rule, it's just a suggestion. But it's meant to be a short overview. So 10 minutes should be enough for this. If you're using a format that is not timed, you can still think about it as, the time to view all this information should be 10 minutes. That applies for things such as a website, for example, that is not set to a specific time, but maybe you just have enough information that someone can go through it in that time. There's no minimum length, but there are some important requirements of what you need to include. And so you're going to need at least a certain amount of time to include all of those requirements. Those requirements are the description of your technology, including a way that it is used in conservation research, a specific example of how it is currently used or could be used for conservation. It should also include two strengths and two weaknesses, at least at a minimum. It can be more, of your technology. And it should also include citations, and that's for at least 3 peer-reviewed references from the scientific or professional literature. The typical way to do this is to present them in a sequence. First you present the description, then the example, then the strengths and weaknesses, and then the references. Again, this is for those of you that are doing sort of a timed format. If you're doing something like a website, for example, you can have a tab for each one of these different requirements. Now, your description of your technology should be just using a simple language, to explain how your technology works and what it can do. You talk a little bit about the general uses for conservation, just giving the big picture of how it can be used. Like, it can be used to track movement, it can be used to identify organisms, whatever. Just give the big picture. And if you're using visual media and it makes sense to include a diagram, please do that. Try to find one that is available online, and if there isn't one, maybe you can even put together one yourself. You can, if you're doing a presentation format, sometimes you can make your own images, and that works pretty well so that people can understand how the technology works. Now, for your example, then, from the general idea of how it works, you go into the specific, a particular study, or maybe something from your something that is going on. Maybe someone that is using it, or you have encountered the technology in your personal life. You can use that as your example, and if you have the time and can include it, you can maybe have more than one example. And they should be things that are relevant or interesting to you, maybe to your master plan. If that applies, all of that helps make it a little bit more interesting for you. And it's a good idea to present your examples as a narrative or a story. There's a plain way of presenting your technology as if you were reporting on a paper, right? But even those things can be presented as a narrative of, scientists were wondering about this issue for whatever reason, for X, Y, and Z reasons. Then they used the technology, they found this particular research, and they concluded that this was happening. And so this is all information that you can easily find in the abstract of your paper if you are working from a published study, and that could make it easier for you to build that kind of narrative. Now, for the strengths and weaknesses, that's pretty straightforward. You need a minimum of 2 of each. They can be more. You can certainly include more than 2. And of course, they are related to conservation or wildlife monitoring or ecology. And your references. So again, you need at least 3 of them for peer-reviewed sources. You might include as many as 6. And what we mean by peer-reviewed is articles from scientific or professional journals. You might have some references that are reliable, that are not from peer-reviewed sources, and you might include those if you want, but they don't count towards the minimum of 3 that you need to have. The format that you would use for your references can be APA, that we use for most classes, or you can use an alternative if you're familiar with a different style, but you must be consistent, right? If you're using APA, then all of your references should be in APA. Now, for including your references within your document, you can use either in-text citations, within your media product, you can use either in-text citations or footnotes. It depends mainly on what looks better to you. So you can decide on that. Now, I would suggest if you're using in-text citations, try to, again, explain that in a conversational way. Don't say et al. Say, a group of scientists led by such and such, for example. And then all the full references that you're including in your paper in your presentation should be mentioned in the body of the project, so that your audience can see what you're using them for, right? There has to be that connection. Otherwise, it might seem like you're just inflating your reference list with stuff that you didn't actually consult. For audio formats, it gets a little bit tricky. So one way to get around that difficulty, because it's hard to just read, or it makes no sense to just read your references once you're done with your audio recording. What you can do is create a Google document that includes your list of references, and then you can use this service by Google called goo.gl that creates a short web address that you can use for making one of those long web addresses from Google Documents into something that you can just share in the description of your audio recording, or even in the recording itself. You could say something like, to see the full list of references used for this recording, go to goo.gl/, and then you select for that. In that case, you would have selected, references or whatever title you want to use for it. So just try it out and let me know how it works for you. Now, one other issue is, what kind of content should you be using in your presentations and your media products? And a real issue is that there's copyright, and so we have to be a little bit careful about that, because you are putting your work out there for everyone to see, and we don't want to upset anyone that that might think you're using their work without giving proper credit. So one way to do this is to use content labeled as Creative Commons, and also license for reuse is another normal way of describing the license that content that you can use usually has. And the idea here is that it is a kind of media content that is put out there online, and that the author is okay with you using it in your own work. Now, finding that kind of content is done by using specialized searches. There's a version of that for Google Images, for Bing, for Flickr. There's a website called pixabay.com that has exclusively content that is public domain and can be reused. So that's the basic idea. You should try to use that kind of content whenever possible. In some cases, it might be impossible for a very specific diagram. In that case, you might include it, but you still have to give full attribution to whoever created that content. So the main idea about providing attribution for content that you use is that your audience should be able to know where the media came from. You're giving that person credit for creating that work. Now, this is not the central goal of the TPR, right? So although I'm going to be looking for that, I don't want it to be something that is, something that consumes all of your time and becomes extremely stressful. So when you're providing attribution, there's some guidelines in the document, in the assignment details document, but essentially try to include as much information as possible. Sometimes you won't be able to find the author or the title, but then you include, the website that the content was found on and the license, and that's enough. We're trying to do best practices, but as long as you're making an effort to give credit, that is enough for this assignment. And when you're using templates or clip art that is provided by your platform, you don't really need to cite those. It is understood that they are provided by the platform you're using. That's especially common for websites or some of the presentation platforms that you guys are working on. Now, where do you include attribution for images or video? Well, depending on the platform, again, you have some freedom to do this, whatever works best for you. It makes sense in some cases to put the little bit of information directly next to each image or each video that you're including, because then we immediately know which one it refers to. Another thing you can do is have a designated section in your project that deals with that. And that can be a specific slide in your presentation, at the end of a video or audio recording, in a specific tab in your website. And what you do is you can label each one of your images or videos with a number, and then you just have the whole list of attributions in a specific place in your media product. And that way we can find out which is which and make that connection. And with that, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this made things clearer for you guys. If not, please ask questions. I hope you enjoy completing this assignment. Again, it's not meant to be something stressful. And if you have questions, of course, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. I'll see you in the workshops. Bye.